The mist hung thick in the air, obscuring the boundaries between reality and fantasy. Marinda Blackwood, the town's young, curious librarian, breathed in the eerie silence that enveloped Ravenwood. As she looked out of the library, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The fog seemed to whisper to her, taunting her with secrets she couldn't quite grasp. Her long, raven-black hair swirled around her face like a veil, obscuring her piercing green eyes from the world. But even with her back turned, she could feel the weight of Father Thomas's gaze upon her when he entered the library. The aging priest, with his gaunt figure and deep-set eyes, seemed to know more about the town's mysteries than anyone else. Marinda's attention was drawn to a book that had caught the light filtering through the mist that had seeped in through the open door. Its leather binding was worn and weathered, the title faded with time. Instinctively, she reached out and pulled it from the shelf, a sense of curiosity overriding her fear. As she flipped through the pages, the book seemed to come alive in her hands, the words dancing across the parchment in an unfamiliar script. She could almost feel the power emanating from it, beckoning her deeper into its mysteries. The wind picked up, carrying with it a faint whisper that sent a shiver down Marinda's spine. It was a voice she'd never heard before, but it seemed to echo in the depths of her soul. As she stood there, transfixed by the sound, she couldn't help but wonder if it was connected to the book in her hands. Sheriff James Dalton, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and weathered features, emerged from the shadows. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene before him. Marinda and the book. "What have you got there, Miss Blackwood?" he asked, his voice calm but stern. Father Thomas, who had been watching from a distance, stepped forward. "It's a dangerous thing you've found there, child," he warned. "Best to put it back where you found it." His voice trembled slightly, betraying the fear that lay beneath his calm exterior. Marinda looked up at the priest, confusion etched on her face. "But it feels like it belongs to me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the whispers in the wind. "It's calling to me." As if in response, the whispers grew louder, swirling around them like a living thing. The mist out east began to part, revealing the truth of the town's hidden past. The whispering entity, long thought to be banished, had returned. And it was drawing Marinda deeper into its web of secrets and madness. Father Thomas knew what he must do. He took Marinda's hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Come with me, child. We must confront this darkness together." He started out of the library and then led her through the twisting streets of Ravenwood, the whispers following them like a malevolent shadow. As they approached the old church, Marinda felt a sense of foreboding wash over her. The whispers seemed to grow louder here, as if they were drawn to the place where the priest had first encountered the entity so many years ago. Father Thomas took her to the crypt, where ancient tomes and artifacts were kept hidden from prying eyes. "Here," he said, gesturing to a particular volume. "This may hold the key to banishing the whispers." Marinda opened the book, her fingers trembling with anticipation and fear. The pages were filled with arcane symbols and diagrams, each more terrifying than the last. "What do I do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the whispers that filled the air. Father Thomas closed his eyes and took a deep breath, steeling himself against the power of the entity. "You must use the book to summon the spirit of the entity," he said. "But be warned, it will not be an easy task. Once you have done so, you must confront it and command it to return to the void from which it came." He placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her what comfort he could. "Are you ready, Marinda?" Marinda nodded, feeling a mixture of determination and fear coursing through her veins. She took a deep breath and began to chant from the book, her voice echoing through the crypt and beyond, filling the air with arcane words and power. The candles flickered and danced, casting eerie shadows across the walls, and the ancient artifacts seemed to stir, as if they were coming to life. As she continued to chant, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the entity were drawing near. A cold wind swept through the crypt, sending a shiver down Marinda's spine. Suddenly, the air in front of her shifted, and a shadowy figure began to take form. It was the whispering entity, its features twisted and malevolent, its eyes glowing with otherworldly light. Father Thomas, sensing the entity's presence, stepped forward. "You shall not return," he shouted, his voice echoing through the crypt. "You are banished, foul spirit." The entity hissed in response, its gaze fixing on Marinda. "She is mine," it cried, its horrid voice filling the air with madness and despair. Marinda felt the weight of the entity's attention on her, but she refused to yield. Drawing on the power of the book and her own will, she continued to chant, summoning the strength to confront the darkness that threatened to consume her. With each word, the entity grew more enraged, its form shifting and twisting as it struggled against the bindings that held it. Finally, with a great cry of anguish, the whispering entity tore free from the confines of the book, its essence dissipating into the ether. The whispers died away, leaving only the faintest echo in the air, and the candles in the crypt flickered back to life. Marinda collapsed to the floor, spent but triumphant, as Father Thomas knelt beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You have done it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have saved Ravenwood." The town would never know the full extent of what had transpired that fateful night. They would never know that it was Marinda Blackwood, the reclusive daughter of the town's most prominent family, who had faced down the darkness and emerged victorious. But Father Thomas knew, and Sheriff Dalton knew, and the whispers in the wind would always bear witness to her courage and her sacrifice. As for the town itself, Ravenwood was a picturesque village nestled in the heart of the Shadowmoor Forest. Its cobblestone streets were lined with neat, tidy cottages adorned with flowers, each bearing the coat of arms of a different family. The Blackwood Manor, towering over the center of town, stood as a testament to the wealth and power that had been inherited by Marinda and her brother, Edward. The bustling market square was a place of commerce and gossip, where townsfolk would gather to trade wares and exchange news. But beneath the surface, there was now an undercurrent of unease, a sense that something was not quite right. The whispers in the wind, once a mere annoyance, had taken on a new, ominous quality, as if they were warning of darker times to come. And though Marinda had banished the whispering entity, its influence still lingered in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to return. The years passed, and Marinda found solace in her studies of ancient tomes and artifacts, hoping to uncover a way to permanently rid Ravenwood of the whispers once and for all. She spent her days hidden away in the manor's library, having resigned her position as librarian, to spend time poring over dusty scrolls and crumbling parchment. Her only company the flickering light of candles and the gentle scratching of quill on parchment. Father Thomas, now an elderly and frail man, continued to minister to the people of Ravenwood, ever vigilant against any signs of the whispering entity's return. And Sheriff Dalton, his hair now streaked with gray, patrolled the streets, keeping watch over the town he loved, always ready to face whatever challenges might come their way. But for all their vigilance, they could not ignore the growing sense of foreboding that hung over Ravenwood like a shroud. They knew that the battle against the whispering entity was far from over, and that one day, perhaps sooner than they dared hope, they would have to face it again. But for now, they would remain steadfast, united in their determination to protect their beloved town, even if it meant risking everything in the process. As for Marinda Blackwood, she continued her studies, ever mindful of the whispers in the wind that seemed to grow louder with each passing day. She had come to understand that the key to defeating the whispering entity lay not in destroying it outright, but in uncovering the truth about its origins and the ancient prophecies that foretold of its return. Her search led her to the farthest reaches of the Shadowmoor Forest, where she discovered an ancient ruin, long forgotten and lost to time. In the depths of the ruins, Marinda uncovered an ancient tome, its pages yellowed and fragile with age. The writing within was in a language she had never seen before, but she sensed that it held the key to ending the whispering entity's reign of terror once and for all. As she studied the text, she felt a newfound sense of purpose and determination welling up within her. She knew that the fate of Ravenwood, and perhaps the entire world, rested on her shoulders. With renewed vigor, Marinda returned to Ravenwood, where she shared her discoveries with Father Thomas and Sheriff Dalton. They listened intently, their faces etched with concern, but also a glimmer of hope. The prophecies spoke of a chosen one, a descendant of the Blackwood family, who would have the power to vanquish the whispering entity once and for all. And as they pondered this revelation, they knew that the time for action was drawing near. The nights grew longer and colder, and the whispers in the wind seemed to grow louder with each passing hour. Strange occurrences had started to endanger the people of the town, with every day bringing another fearful discovery. The townsfolk were terrified, and people let the worst of their natures free. Neighbor turned against neighbor, friends sacrificed each other to the darkness growing in their town. Marinda, Father Thomas, and Sheriff Dalton prepared themselves for the battle that lay ahead, each in their own way. They knew that they might not survive the coming confrontation, but they also knew that they could not allow the whispering entity to continue its reign of terror unchecked. They were, each in their own way, willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of Ravenwood and all those they loved. As the final hour drew near, they gathered at the edge of the Shadowmoor forest, their hearts heavy with the weight of destiny. Before them lay the ancient ruins, now aglow with a malevolent light, as if summoning the whispering entity back into the world. Marinda clutched the ancient tome to her chest, feeling its power coursing through her veins. Father Thomas held aloft a holy symbol, its light piercing the darkness like a beacon of hope. And Sheriff Dalton, his sword in hand, stood resolute, prepared to face whatever horrors might emerge from the shadows. With a nod, they charged forward, their footsteps echoing through the forest as they marched toward their fate. The whispering entity waited, its malice and fury threatening to consume them, but they did not waver. They knew that they were not alone, for the spirits of their ancestors and the people of Ravenwood watched over them, guiding their steps and lending them strength. And as they drew nearer, the ancient tome glowing brighter with each passing moment. Perhaps, with its guidance, the tide of battle might begin to turn in their favor. At last, they stood before the ruins, the whispering entity towering above them, its essence swirling about it like a storm-tossed sea. Marinda stepped forward, the ancient tome held high, its words ringing through the air like a clarion call. She spoke the words of power that she had painstakingly translated from the ancient text, and as she did so, the whispers in the wind began to fade, the power of the whispering entity waning with each passing moment. Father Thomas and Sheriff Dalton joined her, their voices echoing through the forest as they chanted in unison, their faith and determination burning bright. And as the last word faded from their lips, the whispering entity let out a terrible cry of anguish, its essence dissipating into the night like smoke on the wind. The ruins crumbled, the whispers were silenced, and Ravenwood was saved. Marinda, Father Thomas, and Sheriff Dalton stood together, their hearts light with the knowledge that they had done what needed to be done. They knew that the world would never truly be safe from the whispers, but for now, they could rest, secure in the knowledge that Ravenwood was free. As word spread throughout the town, the people emerged from their homes, their faces etched with relief and gratitude. They gathered around the trio, offering words of thanks and praise, sharing stories of how the whispers had tormented them and their loved ones. Marinda felt a newfound sense of belonging, of being part of something greater than herself. She knew that she would never be able to fully repay the debt she owed to her friends and the people of Ravenwood. Over the following weeks, the town began to heal. The scars of the whispering entity's reign remained, but the people worked tirelessly to rebuild and restore Ravenwood to its former glory. Father Thomas oversaw the reconstruction of the church, making sure that it was a beacon of hope and faith for all who needed it. Sheriff Dalton returned to his duties, keeping watch over the town and ensuring that its people remained safe. And Marinda, now seen as something of a heroine among the people, found herself drawn back to the old mansion on the outskirts of town. She spent countless hours poring over the ancient texts and scrolls that she had found within its dusty halls, uncovering secrets and knowledge that had been lost to time. She began to share her discoveries with the townsfolk, leading to a renewed interest in the history and culture of Ravenwood. As the years passed, Marinda became known as the town's historian, her knowledge and insight cherished by all. She never forgot the sacrifices that had been made to save Ravenwood, nor the role that she had played in that struggle. But she also found peace and contentment in her new life, surrounded by friends and a community that truly valued her. The whispers might still be out there, somewhere, but for now, at least, Ravenwood was safe. One evening, as she sat in the inn, sipping at her ale and listening to the stories and laughter around her, a young boy approached her, his eyes wide with curiosity. He had heard tales of her adventures, of the ancient tome and the whispering entity, and he wanted to know more. Marinda smiled kindly, patting the stool beside her, and began to tell him the story once again, embellishing it with details that only she could know, for she had lived it. As she spoke, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness for the boy, for he would grow up in a world where whispers and shadows would always loom large. But she also felt hope, for she knew that there were people like him, brave and curious, who would carry on the fight against the darkness, who would keep the memory of Ravenwood's struggle alive and ensure that it was never forgotten. And so, she continued to share her stories, passing on the torch of knowledge and hope, knowing that in doing so, she was helping to make the world a brighter place. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves and sending shadows dancing across the walls of the inn. But within, the light of Marinda's tale warmed the hearts of those who listened, casting aside the darkness for a while and reminding them that, together, they could face any challenge, no matter how great the odds or how ancient the evil. For in the end, it was not the whispers that defined them, but the voices they raised in defiance, the stories they told, and the lives they lived. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it.